Yeah. Good afternoon. So when most people think of the German Empire before World War I, we think of people like this. Pictured here is Kaiser Wilhelm II and his military entourage preparing for war in 1914. But what often gets left out are institutions like this. Here is the German Reichstag, or National Parliament, which was one of the many representative institutions in the empire during this period. What's even more striking about this, if you look at the bottom there, was the level of voter participation that was involved in this. 85% voter turnout is very impressive when you consider a country like America, where we can barely get above 40% in congressional elections. So when I started my research project, I wanted to know what was being done to get such a high turnout. What were political parties doing in order to receive so many votes? When I began my search through the literature, I arrived at this one concept here called Integrationsparteien, or parties of integration, which is basically a theory that talks about new parties that were developing during this time that could sort of incorporate their own socioeconomic class or interest group in ways that got them more involved in the process. One of the main parties involved in this was the Social Democratic Party, the party of the working class. And they were basically very good at getting the working class voters out to vote. Three main portions of this theory here of integration parties is the first there, which is ideology. And basically that portion of this theory says that this is the time when modern ideologies are becoming a real force in politics. And so the existence of something like socialism could get working class voters involved in the process. The second there, organization, talks about the ways that parties were becoming better at organizing through central committees that could run campaigns like they never could before and get propaganda out in unique ways. The third aspect is Kampf Character, which is another German word, I apologize. But this one's very hard to translate. Literally it means struggle character, but what we're actually talking about is people who are actively involved in the process. They really are committed to their cause, and by that virtue, voters are more invested in themselves. So that's the aspect that I'm most interested in, because while many historians have looked at this from the aspect of party leaders and the main sort of characters that run the show, there's been little work done on this sort of grassroots level to look at how this worked out, let's say, in one community. So when I began my research, I was asking the question is, did every voting community have a sort of Kampf character? Did they have someone that they believed in that made them turn out to vote? And so, because my case here is a very grassroots level examination, I decided to look at one city, the city of Leipzig, which was a very major sort of working class city during this time, and the time period of 1890 to 1912, which is essentially when the Social Democratic Party became the strongest and largest party in the German Empire. In the interest of today's presentation, I'm going to talk about one of the individuals that I examined in my thesis, the guy that has that beautiful red arrow over his head, Friedrich Geyer. He was the Reichstag's deputy for the 13th district in Leipzig for 38 years, which is a pretty impressive run. And basically, I look at this through four different sort of areas of study. The first is biographical. In this, I look at different biographies to sort of identify that he was truly a working class member and therefore could act as a representative of this group. The next is network. Here I keep going with those biographies, but also look at newspapers and other documentation about interest groups to see how Friedrich Geyer was sort of well connected with the Leipzig community. He was well known in the district, so this gave him a sort of advantage. The third part, and this is where I sort of bring in the party at large, I look at party minutes from congresses to see why they were chosen, and it turns out that Friedrich Geyer was chosen because he was a working class member, and they knew that would be able to sell well, which brings me to the next part, in propaganda. If you look at propaganda posters and different advertisements, you see that Geyer, his image of his face and just his person was often a big part of the campaign, which sort of shows that this was an important aspect of their electoral process. The last part there, representation. I basically scanned through Reichstag minutes, which took a while, but I got at basically looking at how Friedrich Geyer, in this case, was advocating for the working class, which shows how he was truly integrating the working class into politics through his own representation. And so, why is this important? What does this mean? Well, aside from giving us a better understanding of German political parties at this time and how they were able to integrate, it also speaks to something about that man on the left there. So Donald Trump is someone that you can say it's not necessarily the conservative ideology or the organization of the Republican Party that has brought him to power, but it's his individual character. Many people care about him and who he is and believe that he's someone that they can believe in, and he's their Kampf character. So while my study doesn't really look at big people like Donald Trump, and it's more about the grassroots, it's really about returning the individual to the process, about looking at politics through a more human scope and examining how personal relations can really work to bring different forces into politics. Thank you.